Welcome to Thrive on Mission. I am Dave Jones, and as always with Jim Book, Thrive on Mission is the podcast of the Christian Restoration Association. Jim is our associate director and does a great job traveling the country, inspiring and helping churches get to that next level of growth where they need to be.
Dave, it's good to be with you again. And man, we've had some exciting things happen. And one of the exciting things that I think we've been developing out of Mission 120 is a monthly Zoom call with many preachers. I think we have 52 or 53 that have been invited. Come on. And let me just say this. If we have missed you, somehow we overlooked you, you're like, I want to be on that monthly Zoom call. Please let me know. And we will add you to the list. I had 2 or 3 preachers email me yesterday, like, we want to get in. And then, man, we want everybody on. But last week we had Jeff Faull. Jeff Faull is highly respected in our brotherhood, but he has had a huge impact in the restoration movement and in the Indianapolis area and in that church. And so we invited him to come on to our Mission 120 Zoom call and focus primarily on discipling. And Jeff, I'll tell you what, Dave, he brought up a point that I had really never thought of in all my years of ministry. We typically think of discipling as something that happens post-baptism, but man, he could not have driven the point home faster and better. We actually start discipling the first time we hand an invitation card to someone or invite someone to worship or open up a conversation about Christ, salvation. And so it's discipling really starts before the baptism. Now it grows to maturity afterwards, but he just really challenged all the guys on, we got to get our people acclimated to having really quality conversations about Christianity in a non-threatening way, but roll this stuff out at baseball games, at barbecues, office parties. And so, and then he pushed hard membership class, or connecting class, get these visitors in class and let's find out where they are and let's move them towards the baptistry. So I think you're going to really enjoy what he has to say. And he was a real blessing to all of us.
All right, man, what an honor to be a part of the very first 120 gathering. And let me just say, I love what you guys are doing. So many times we sit alone, isolated in our churches. We look at churches around us that are seem to have things going on and big things happening, and it can be easy to feel alone and to feel despairing about where our church is going. And when we get together like this and we share ideas that are scalable, because we've probably all been to seminars or conferences where we hear somebody from some big church talking and we think, well, that's great. We admire what they're doing, but it's not scalable for my church. But when you look at the church growth principles of the New Testament, when you do things the Acts way, it fits at any size. And sometimes some of the smaller sized churches can implement these things even easier than large churches. And so I want to talk about some of those kinds of things today. All my life, I've been taught that the church needs to be modeled after the church in the Bible, that the goal is to restore the New Testament church, its beliefs, its practices, its ordinances, its results. And so often we're talking about the New Testament church or the early church or the primitive church, the Bible pattern for the church, that we should spend a lot of time in the book of Acts. And I still believe that. But sometimes, just to be completely straightforward, I struggle with what that means and what it doesn't mean, and whether or not the church I lead is becoming an authentic New Testament church. At a CRA conference, I heard Ben Merrill say one time, we think because we've restored baptism and the Lord's Supper that we have restored the New Testament church. And he pointed out that that's the start. There's so many other things for us to do to restore the New Testament church. About 25 years ago, I was thinking about something and I wrote it in my journal, and I've revisited it many times, and I still do on occasion. In fact, I revisited it just this week. And I want to read, this was the entry from my journal. I am continually plagued by what the New Testament church is supposed to look like. I know it doesn't look like some of the anemic, legalistic, rule-based churches I've observed, but neither does it look like consumer-driven megachurches that are a mile wide and an inch deep. I know that true spirituality is not found in the shibboleth pronouncing bigotry of self-righteousness, nor is it found in the fad-driven pragmatism of pop spirituality. God, would you lead me to real spirituality and allow me to help lead a real New Testament church? I continually struggle with these issues. I don't want to feel double-minded and unstable in all my ways or be tossed by every wind of teaching. Help me to live with the right level of ambiguity and certainty. I don't know if any of you have had those kinds of thoughts in your mind, but that's been my desire and my prayer for my entire 40 plus years of ministry, and specifically for the 38 years at the church that I serve now. And I've always wanted to avoid the twin ditches, the ditch of toxic legalism on one side and the ditch of dangerous progressivism on the other side. I'd like to be a part of leading an authentic, real, honest New Testament church. And in order to do that, we have to have God's vision for the church. And I'll start off with a quote from Rick Atchley. Rick Atchley said, "The question is not, does your church have a vision? The question is, does Jesus' vision have your church?" And so on this first gathering of the 120, I want to talk about Jesus' vision for the church, obviously, as it is seen in the Great Commission. Sean Lovejoy wrote a book, and his book was entitled Be Mean About the Vision. And this is what he said: "One thing is certain, if our church or organization is going to accomplish its mission, we're going to need to be determined, resolute, and intentional. We're going to need to be willing to do whatever it takes to keep the vision from being detoured and derailed. And when everyone understands and embraces the vision, there is life, passion, growth, and success, and God will be glorified." As a leader, the godliest thing you can do is be mean about the vision. And accomplishing the vision requires intentionality, consistency, and commitment and courage. So what I want to talk about for the next few moments is not some kind of a vision or mission statement for your church, although I think that can be very helpful. I want to talk about God's vision for the church. All right. So if you look at the top of that, our mission statement at Mount Gilead is helping people become lifelong disciples of Jesus. And the way we teach that is we say that being a disciple of Jesus is about not only becoming a disciple of Jesus, but continuing to become a disciple of Jesus. Every single page of the New Testament has something on it to help us become as disciples of Jesus. So when you think about helping people become disciples of Jesus, you think about the Great Commission. One of the things that drives me when I talk about this is how that idea, that vision permeates all the pages of the New Testament. If you even started with the mission of Jesus, and you could look at him in any of the Gospels, the mission of Jesus was making disciples. Jesus would make disciples of himself. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. In fact, we find the definition of a disciple there in Matthew 4:19. Follow me, a disciple, somebody who follows Jesus. I'll make something out of you. So it's not only somebody that follows Jesus, it's somebody that's being changed and transformed by Jesus. Fishers of men, you're on mission with Jesus. And so what we try to teach at the church where I preach is that a disciple is someone who is following Jesus, who is being transformed by Jesus, and who is on mission with Jesus. And you can't read the Gospels without seeing that the mission of Jesus was to make disciples. And when you get to John chapter 17, he's telling his Father, I haven't, of the ones you gave me, I haven't lost one of them, except the son of perdition. So the mission of Jesus was to make disciples. It's also the mission of the church. And I have a little thing I like to go through. You get the 7 candlesticks in the first 3 chapters of Revelation. And so I have these 7 lampstands or candlesticks that help us to see the mission of the church. One would just be the purpose statements of the church, which would, of course, include the Great Commission. It might include that passage that Paul wrote to Timothy about the church being the pillar and the support of the truth, but it has to do with the mission of the church being that of making disciples. When you look at the 7 lampstands themselves, You learn about what the church is supposed to be in the opening chapters of the book of Revelation. When you think about the metaphors for the church is a flock, the church is a bride, the church is a building, the church is an army, and all those pictures of the church. The Bible doesn't just present one technical definition of the church, it gives us all these pictures with various hues and nuances. So the purpose statements of the church remind us of the mission of the church. The lampstands remind us of the vision of the church. The metaphors remind us of the vision of the church. And then, of course, the primitive church. And that's where we and our restoration movement predecessors have historically set up camp. What did the primitive church look like? What did the church in the book of Acts look like? In fact, it's my last series at Mount Gilead that we're in right now. It's called Authentic Church. What we're going through the book of Acts. What does the authentic church look like? Then there would be, of course, just the definition of the word church, the ecclesia, the assembly, the called out ones. What does the Bible mean when it uses those words? And I really think that a lot of us as preachers sometimes might have trouble passing the red-faced definition of the church. Then there would be the New Testament local churches we could look at. What did the church at Corinth look like? What did the church at Ephesus look like? What did the church at Colossae look like? And then, of course, last, you might look at some contemporary churches. And you've probably all heard of simple church and seeker church and externally focused church and purpose-driven church and intentional church. And there's conference after conference, and there may be some good things in some of those. But the real pattern for the church is found in the pages of the book of Acts. So whether you're talking about the mission of Jesus or the mission of the church, it's all the same, making disciples. In fact, it's the purpose of the New Testament. A guy by the name of Alger Fitch, who was a famous restorationist, wrote a book called The Hidden Purpose of the New Testament. And you can buy that book at the CRA. They have them in stock there. At least they did the last time that I checked. And basically, what Alger Fitch is saying about the purpose of the New Testament is that it was written for the purpose of disciple making. And he sees the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as discipleship journals, disciple making journals, or sometimes he uses the word missionary. He sees the book of Acts as disciple making history. And then he sees the epistles as disciple-making correspondence, where they're writing back and forth to one another. And he sees the book of Revelation as disciple-making struggles. And he comes to the conclusion that the entirety of the New Testament is written to drive the church towards its mission of making disciples. And so when you see a doctrinal correction taking place in the New Testament, or you see moral correction taking place in the New Testament, those were things that were derailing the church's mission to make disciples. And so they were written to keep the church on track with this mission of making disciples who make disciples. And of course, it's the objective of church leaders. If you go to that next column, I think one of the most underrated verses in the New Testament is Colossians 1:28. We proclaim him, admonishing every man and teaching every man with all wisdom, so that we may present every man complete in Christ. Our job's not to build a big church. Our job's not to build a well-known church or a famous church. Our job is to build a church where we're doing our best to present every person complete or mature in Christ, because that's what disciple making is. So it should be the objective of every church leader. And we see that in the famous Ephesians 4 passage, verses 11 through 16, equipping, building up, the unity of the faith, knowledge, maturity, and the fullness of Christ. We see it in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Paul talks about what it means to be a real church, where the message is not man-made. He said, when we gave our message to you, you received it for what it was, not something from man, but something that came from God. Not man-pleasing. Paul said we didn't do it to please people, and not man-handling. We were like a nursing mother among you. So the objective of church leaders is to help people become disciples and to keep becoming his disciples, lifelong disciples of Jesus. So we got the mission of Jesus, the mission of the church, the purpose of the New Testament, the objective of church leaders, and even I would contend the goal of the gathering. I think there's two places in the New Testament that shows us what ought to happen in the assembly. One would be in James when he says, when a rich man comes into your assembly, you don't treat him better than you do the poor man and give him the best seat. But the other, and perhaps the most prominent one, is in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, that gives us a glimpse of what it ought to look like when for lack of a better term, a seeker, unbeliever, ungifted, comes into our assembly. And what becomes very clear is that the purpose of the assembly isn't just for the outsider, it's specifically for the edification of believers with an eye toward outsiders or unbelievers that might come in. So it's for the edification of the saints, but the saints have to be aware that there will be unbelievers that come into their midst. And so consequently, he says, well, if somebody comes in and you all speak in tongues, they're going to think you're crazy. So one of the things we do, the goal of our gathering, because we want to make disciples, is we want to give them edification and clarity. In fact, it says the unbeliever who comes into your assembly will fall on his face, admit that he is a sinner, and say, surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. So even when we build our worship services, we're looking for edification of building up of the saints, but we know that there will be unbelievers that come in. So maybe a good way to say it is, we're not seeker driven, but we are seeker aware. So we want clarity, we want conviction, we want confession, and we want someone to walk out there and say, man, the presence of God is in that place. Then the next column is the role of every disciple. And when you look at the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, and you look at the famous passages in Acts chapter 1 there, you see that disciple making is for everybody. We had more baptisms last year than we've ever had in our history. And I did 2 or 3 of them because there are people who are baptizing people. It's the role of every disciple to be a disciple maker. And then finally, it's the heart of the Trinity. The Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are involved in the Great Commission and in the command to go and make disciples. So I know that's kind of elementary, and yet what that did for me when I discovered that is it hit me with the full cumulative force of the fact that disciple making is indeed the core mission of the church. And if you would have asked me if I thought that, I said, of course I think that. If you would have asked me if we were doing that at our church, I would have said, of course we're doing that at our church. But I've lived under sort of a delusion for many years that somehow we can mass produce disciples. And I don't think we can mass produce disciples. I think when you look at Jesus, and one of the things that has been pointed out to me often in the last couple of years is that we accept the Jesus doctrine, but we don't always accept the Jesus method. And the Jesus method of disciple making was intentional, and it was personal, and it was transformational. Yes, he spoke to the crowds and the multitudes. Yes, he spent time with the 70. But the majority of his time was spent with the 12 or with the 3. And he made disciples intentionally and relationally. When I was in college at Cincinnati Christian University, Cincinnati Bible College at the time, I went there in 1980, and it was kind of like there were 2 camps. There were more than that, but 2 camps. There were the people who were there because they wanted to be preachers, and there were people who were there that were concerned about youth ministry and discipleship. And the leader of the preaching program was Bob Stacy. The leader of the discipleship program was a guy named David Roadcup. And it's kind of like when I was in school, you were either a Bob's boy preaching, or you were a disciple of Dave Roadcup, who spent a lot of time on discipleship. And I focused all my attention on preaching. And to this day, I still believe what W.E. Sangster said, the most unknown preacher in the smallest town can whisper to himself on the way to the pulpit on Sunday morning, nothing more important is going to happen in this town today than what I'm about to do. I still believe that. And I love preaching the gospel. But as I focused on that, I missed a tremendous opportunity to learn more about pouring into a few people at a time like Jesus did. And so in these last, 6 or 7 years of my ministry, I have had opportunity to rethink that and decided that's what we were going to do at Mount Gilead, regardless of what it did to the growth of the church. We can't mass produce disciples. We have to make disciples who make disciples. And I was willing to accept whatever losses came with that. And instead, it caused exponential growth at our church. When the very best thing you can do to help your church be what it needs to be and help your people become disciples who make disciples is that you be a disciple who makes disciples. That you decide, if I don't do anything else, I'm going to grab a couple of guys at a time and I'm going to teach them to be disciples. I'm going to teach them to make disciples. And when I get done walking with them for a year, I'm going to do it again. And I know men who have done that for their entire ministries. I know an 80-year-old man who's done that for his entire ministry. And there are ripple effects of his work all over the country because every year he took a new group of guys under his wing and he started making disciples. So while we're talking about that, I'm going to attempt to share something, two more things before we move on. This is typically how we've thought about discipleship. First, we evangelize them, tell them about Jesus, and baptize them, and then we disciple them. Is that kind of the way you guys have been taught all your life? And then let me just make a slight tweak to that. Again, okay. So the tweak here is that instead of seeing evangelism and then discipleship, the whole umbrella of the process is disciple making. The whole umbrella of the process is discipleship. And so we are discipling lost people to salvation, and we're discipling saved people to maturity. It is, I think it's more in keeping with the way the Great Commission is described. To go and make disciples of all nations. We disciple them to Jesus, to conversion. And then there's a line of demarcation because now there's accountability and we're discipling saved people to maturity. And when you just put this framework, these glasses on, you see disciple making or discipleship as the whole process. And that way discipleship begins at hello. In other words, you are starting to disciple somebody even before they even know they're being discipled. Sometimes we misrepresent Matthew 4:19, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And we say, hey, Jesus is walking along the seashore one day and he sees these guys fishing and he says, follow me. And these guys just abandon their nets and they follow this stranger. Right. But they've already spent time with him. They already know him. They'd already been through the come and see process. He was discipling them even before they agreed to be discipled. He just said, come and see. And so they decided to come and see. And eventually they made that decision. And so discipleship begins at hello. We used to have Monday night basketball at our church. And I remember sitting on the bench one time, because that's where I'm usually at when somebody's playing basketball. And I'm sitting next to a guy in the church that had brought his neighbor to play basketball. He'd only been to church one time. And he looked over at me and he said this about his friend who was out there playing basketball. He said, he doesn't even know what's going to hit him, does he? And I said, no. And certainly, a few weeks later, the guy becomes a Christian and he's been there ever since. He was being discipled and didn't even know he was being discipled. So discipleship begins at hello. And that's how come we can welcome people into our church when they still have all kinds of sin and difficulty and misunderstanding in their life. We can welcome them to come and be among us because we're discipling lost people to salvation. And then we're discipling saved people to maturity. So that kind of lens on disciple making is very, very helpful to me. And that's why, one of the things that Jim asked me to talk about here today is to talk about how important it is to have a process, a disciple-making pathway at your church. When somebody expresses interest. So let me just give you an idea of the content. I won't walk you through all of it, but here's the paragraph I would use to start. Welcome to Mount Gilead's Merge class. You're here tonight because you have some kind of interest in Mount Gilead and in Jesus, and we're here because we're interested in connecting with you. And tonight we want to specifically talk about our church, but also what a church is really supposed to be and how we are endeavoring to become one. So I explain a little bit about the church, and then I just tell them right up front, and I let them share a little bit. Here's some bad reasons to want to join this church. So I just lead with that, because because you think you found the perfect church. Sometimes people show up at your church and they really like it. It's almost like a honeymoon phase, and they think they've just found, just the perfect place. And we're going to set them up for failure. My dad always used to tell me, son, if you find the perfect church, don't go there because you'll ruin it. So I just tell them right up, you're going to find something you don't like here. So if you think you found the perfect church, that's not a good reason to join this church. The second thing, I'm going to let somebody in here. All right. The second thing I say is another bad reason to join the church is because you think we can meet all your needs. Because we can't. And if it's a consumeristic reason that they're joining the church, we're destined to failure. I love that saying, that the Jesus you preach and the gospel you teach determines the kind of disciple that you get. The Jesus you preach and the gospel you teach determines the kind of disciple that you get. So if you're coming here because you think we can meet all your needs, you're going to be disappointed. And number three, another bad reason to join this church is just because it's the thing to do. The town where I preach is about 10,000 people, and our church is a larger church in the county. So just by nature of our size, we're going to get people that want to visit our church when they come to town, and I don't want them to stay just because they think it's the thing to do or the place to be. So there are some bad reasons for joining the church. And then I talk about some good reasons to join the church. If you and your family want to draw near to God and go far for Him, if you want to be lifelong disciples of Jesus, this is the place for you. If you desire to connect with other believers in your community, this is the place for you. If you're beginning to understand the mission and the purpose of the church and you want to be a part of it, this is the place for you. And then I talk about the Great Commission, and I just tell them from the beginning, this is a mission-driven church, not a member-driven church. It's a mission-driven church, not a member-driven church. And the mission is to help people become lifelong disciples. It's not just to do what you and your family want us to do. I mean, sometimes when people are just looking for a new church, they need to hear that kind of stuff. So I point out that we are all about being and making disciples of Jesus. A fourth good reason to join the church is because you want to be anchored to God and His people in a world of chaos. A fifth good reason is a place to serve. And I share some ways in which Mount Gilead is a place to serve and that we have high expectations. In fact, at the end of the class, I say, here's what you can expect from us, and here's what we will expect from you. So, it's kind of Jesus called for full surrender, but He also gave full disclosure. He didn't hide behind the fine print. He wasn't like a recruiter who got you to sign up for the service, but not telling you you could get hurt when you do it. So we try to do full disclosure, call for full surrender, and do full disclosure. So after that initial stuff, then I start talking about how you become part of Christ Church. First, you're added to the church by God when you become a Christian, Acts 2. Second, of course, I'm speeding through this. Second, you identify or join with the church in a particular place. What's the first thing Saul did? He came to Jerusalem and he was trying to associate with the disciples. And I talk about the examples we have of church membership in the Bible and joining together in a particular locale and not forsaking the assembly, and all those kinds of good things. And then we talk about reviewing in this group the Bible description and our experiences of becoming a Christian and make sure that they're aligned. So we just ask people to share their experience, hey, how did you come to know Christ? And as they tell that story, I don't have to lead with, have you been baptized for the remission of sins? First, I want to hear them tell me their story, because the truth's going to come out when they tell their story before they hear me say what I think they're supposed to say. So then we go through the teachings on baptism. We have a whole 1 hour baptism class that we do several times a year. And just for the sake of time, it's made up of 3 things. It's made up of passages about baptism. You know, the 1 Peter 3:21 and the Galatians 3 and the Acts 2:38. It's made up of pictures of baptism, which would include Old Testament types like the crossing of the Red Sea. We leave the bondage of sin. We pass through the waters of our baptism. We head toward the promised land. Or Noah's Ark in 1 Peter chapter 3:21. But then it would be people who experienced this. And then we go to the traditional presentations of all the conversions in the book of Acts. And we walk through, and we have that chart that shows faith, repentance, confession, and baptism. And we try to make it real personal with those. Like, what was it like for the eunuch? What was it like? We make those people try to come alive and be real when we tell the stories of conversion in the book of Acts. And then we have some FAQs. So rather than open it up for chaos and bedlam with questions or somebody that's coming to pick a fight, we say, well, what about the thief on the cross? Or what about if I was sprinkled when I was a baby? And so we have like 7 FAQs. And we have often had good crowds and people being baptized that very night, some of them the next Sunday or the next day. But we do that about 3 times a year. So all that's part of our initial, starting point kind of material. And then what we try to develop after that, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I'm talking too much here, but as we start asking the question, what does a new disciple need to know? What do we need to do to build this disciple? Because the Bible presents kind of a timeline of that. You are conceived by the word, begotten by the word. You are born of the water. And after you're born of the water, you're a newborn baby longing for the pure milk of the word. And then there's that period of spiritual adolescence and then spiritual maturity into adulthood. And what often doesn't get put at the other end of that continuum is you become a spiritual parent because you're making disciples, and even a spiritual grandparent because the disciples that you make disciples. The things you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, these things entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also, who will be able to teach others also, who will be able to teach others also. So I just jotted down a couple of things here that you don't have to use what we use, or Jim's going to send you some material if he hasn't already. You may be one of those people that I want to develop my own. So here's the thinking list that I try to use when I think about what a disciple needs next. And I call it short list. So it's I've categorized Bible lists into 4 arenas so that we kind of have a snapshot of the faith once for all delivered to the saints. One is there are things to believe. What is it that a disciple needs to believe? And one of the things that I like to use the most is Ephesians chapter 4. There's one body, one spirit. You're called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who's over all, through all, and in all. And I mean, Cottrell wrote a book, Faith's Fundamentals, I think it was called, and you can get that through CRA, on those 7 things. And the interesting thing is it starts with make every effort to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. And then it lists those 7 things that help us to preserve unity. Baptism, for instance, is something that's supposed to help us preserve unity. So there are some things that every believer, every disciple needs to believe. 1 Corinthians 15, that I made known to you the gospel, which I also delivered to you. Or 1 Timothy 3:16, by common confession. Great is the mystery of godliness. He was revealed in the flesh. He was vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up into glory. That was considered a hymn in the early church. They would sing that. It was common doctrine. So every growing disciple has things they need to believe, and we need to make sure that we decide which of those are absolute hills to die on. What needs to be taught first, in other words, what's primary in all of that. And then the second list is the to be list. So there's not just the to know lists, there's the to be lists. And I'd start with the Beatitudes on that. Poor in spirit, those who mourn, hunger and thirst for righteousness. Or how about the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience. Or the maturity lists. 2 Peter chapter 3, for this very reason, make every effort, add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance. And it says, if you possess those qualities and they're increasing in measure, it'll keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. I heard somebody say the other day, you can have gun barrel straight doctrine, but you can be as empty as the barrel. And so it's not just what you believe, it's what you're becoming. And so there's some becoming lists in the New Testament. And then, of course, there is the to-do lists. And I know following Jesus, a relationship with Jesus, is not just a list of rules. It's not just checking stuff off your to-do list. But these lists are helpful, showing us, yes, there are things we need to believe, there are things we need to be, and there are things we need to do. The Great Commission and the Great Commandment, putting on the armor of God. And perhaps most unpopular of all, there are things to avoid. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity. In the last days, people will be lovers of self. 1 Corinthians 6, sexually immoral, idolaters or adulterers, men who have sex with men, thieves, greedy, drunkards, slanderers, swindlers, not going to inherit the kingdom of God. Got the whole Ephesians 4 thing, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. And I would just say this: you can accomplish a lot of these 4 things: to do, to be, to believe, and to avoid. You can accomplish a lot of that in Ephesians chapter 4. It's amazing how much of that is right there in Ephesians chapter 4. So I guess what I'm saying is, as you build a discipleship pathway so that when someone comes in, no matter where they're at under that discipleship umbrella, you know where to plug them in, and you know what's next for them. You know what the next step is, because it's kind of that idea that we're not just giving somebody a fish, we're teaching them how to fish. So you're giving them a doctrinal tool belt. And one of the ways we do that, we put it in how-to form. And I haven't taught this for a while, but we do one on how to know God the Father, how to know God the Son, how to know God the Holy Spirit, how to know yourself. That would be the nature of man, kind of a defeating the idea of total hereditary depravity. How to study the Bible, how to pray, how to know true doctrine, how to handle money, how to do church, how to know the will of God, how to know you're saved. And that's where we would talk about the eternal security type issue. How to make disciples, and how to prepare for the second coming. So we've got things to believe, things to be, things to do, and things to avoid. That's a good template. If you're wanting to build your own discipleship pathway, it's a good template to keep on moving. I'll give you one other template. It's my most favorite one of all, since we want to be and make disciples of Jesus. To just ask these 4 questions. What did Jesus say? That'd be the red letters, right? And when I talk about the red letters, I'm not talking about being a red letter Christian. Being a red letter Christian is not enough. But we do have to pay attention to what Jesus said. If you hear my words and do them, So what did Jesus say? But not only what did Jesus say, but what did Jesus do? We follow him around in his life. What did Jesus do? And not only what did Jesus say and what did Jesus do, but what was his essence? Who was Jesus? What if I try to imitate him and I try to be conformed to the image of Christ, what did that look like? What does that look like? And then the fourth thing, so what did Jesus say? What did Jesus do? And what was Jesus' essence? Because I want that to be my essence. But the fourth one is the one that gets missed most often. What did Jesus or who did Jesus endorse? And he endorsed the Old Testament scriptures, and he endorsed what the apostles would later teach when he told them the Holy Spirit would lead them into all truth, when he gave them the keys to the kingdom. And guys, I hear a lot of people, even formerly conservative people, who are saying, well, I get my doctrine from Jesus, not from Paul. Or the red letters are the most, if you look up the Red Letter Christians website, it sounds great to be a red letter Christian, but it's actually a reductionist argument where you're just reducing following Jesus to the red letters of the Bible, and you're putting aside everything that the apostles that he endorsed taught. And so I believe that all truth is found in those four things. What Jesus said, what Jesus did, who Jesus was, and who Jesus endorsed. The Old Testament teaching and the teaching that would later become the New Testament, the teaching of the apostles who had given the keys to the kingdom. So hopefully that stimulates your thinking a little bit when you're putting together a discipleship pathway. That's a good framework to use.
Yeah, before a person becomes a part of Mount Gilead, is it mandatory they go through the Connect class?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you would
Now,
say a membership class, Connect class, is an essential part of your dynamic.
yeah, and rules are made to be broken. Let's say, Jim, that you came, and I know you. I know where you stand. We could bypass that process, but I would probably say to you, hey, this is who we are. I think it'd be good for you to sit through this.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Now,
so
let me ask you another question. How aggressive are you? A person visits 2 or 3 weeks. Is what avenue do you go to say to your staff, hey, this person's been coming 3 weeks. How do you empower them to because some people will never make a decision unless they're asked. Is there a way that you have one of your staff members kind of direct them to, hey, we have the membership class being offered next week or whatever. Really want you to be in that.
we promote it heavily
Okay.
from the stage all the time. We have a place where they can scan a code or they can send a text, and we have a physical presence in the lobby. Go to the next steps area, and we just push it and push it and push it so that they can get involved.
Someone told me they've been in your foyer and you'd have to be blind to miss Mount Gilead's thrust towards this Connect class. So I've
Yeah.
heard you guys are pretty aggressive. Yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and it's not in a pushy sort of way.
No,
It's in an opportunity sort of.
right. Which I love.
Yeah.
All right. So Jeff prepared to answer some questions. So we're just going to open it up to the screen. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand and Jeff will take it.
And Jim, if you can help me out, because I'm on an 11-inch MacBook and I
Okay.
have to scroll through to see all
Okay.
the
Well, Brian
people.
Schultz has installed a 75-inch plasma. And so, Jamie, you got a
Nice.
question. Jamie Frankie.
Hey,
Hi,
Jeff.
Jamie.
Hey, really, really good stuff. And appreciate you walking through that. What really intrigues me, you said about 6 or 7 years ago, or sometime in the relatively close past, you made a decision that it wasn't going to matter what it did to attendance and that kind of thing. You changed to more of a discipleship focused model. What specifically things did you change? What did you mean by that you changed?
So, I hate to bring up football, but Peyton Manning, would come up to the line and he would read the defense, and completely change the play. And he'd say Omaha, and you knew that he was going to change the play. And so we had a big year of baptisms, and I was just convicted that we were birthing all these babies and then leaving them on the table. And I came to that conclusion with about 10, 12 other preachers that I was gathering within a cohort for Renew. And we were broken. We were wrecked over that responsibility. And it drove us we stood up one Sunday and said, we were starting a new series today, but instead we're going to do this called Walk With Me. And we just talked about organic discipleship and made just that push with our church. We didn't claim to have it all figured out. You know, sometimes when you're trying to do something new in your church, instead of announcing the revolution, you just do the revolution. And so we started making those changes. And man, it's just been we've had the biggest 3 years I've ever had in 38 years of being here as a result of this emphasis on making disciples. And let me just, in relation to that, Jamie, throw something in that I intended all along to say here. Told Jim I was going to say it. This research comes from Tom Rainier. I don't know the sizes of churches represented here, but this is scalable for no matter what size your church is. The baptism to attendance ratio. Let's say that you have 100 people at your church. If you have 10 baptisms in a year, believe it or not, you are in the top 5% of churches in the nation.
Yeah.
And so wherever you're at, right, if you have 60 people, you can say, you know what? We're shooting for at least 6 baptisms this year. It's all scalable. You know, it's not like we're going to some conference and we're listening to this massive church talk about things that are just out of reach for us, because Jesus designed it that way, that disciple making could be intentional, it could be transformational, and it's relational. And so whatever size you are, I would encourage you to look at those ratios, and you know, you can have a bigger ratio than Southeast Christian Church. They had over 10%. I think they had about 11%. And Christ Church of the Valley has 55,000 members, and they had 10,000 baptisms last year. Well, if you're in a church of 200 people and you do the math, you can reach those kinds of ratios. They're not out of reach. The other thing Tom Rainier says is that one of the problems with church growth is frequency of attendance. So if you're at a church of 200 and half of those people decide, you know what, we like our church, but we're only going to come half the time, or we're just going to come 3 Sundays. Let's say we're going to come 3 Sundays a month instead of 4 Sundays a month. Nobody's mad. Nobody's left the church. There's no big problems, but you just had a 12% attendance decrease simply because of the frequency of attendance. And frequency of attendance has changed throughout the nation and the trends. And so we're sitting here as preachers beating ourselves up, wondering if maybe I'm not the guy for this job, because, you know, the church is declining, when what's happened is a frequency of attendance change, not a loss of people necessarily. And so getting some of those kinds of things in our heads so that we don't despair and always look at how much better this other church is doing. When somebody comes to the local, Christian church ministers meeting to tell the great things going on at their church, you can celebrate that with them and just keep doing the job of making disciples who make disciples.
Hey, y'all. This is Archie Gilmer, Western North Carolina. I don't have my name. I don't think my name's on there. I'm looking at all of this stuff we've been thinking about for the last couple of years over here. And our people don't understand any of this because nobody's ever done it here. And I'm trying to get it implemented. So do y'all think it would be a good idea? I think it would be a good idea to develop these programs that that Jeff just explained. But then I'm going to ask our people to be the first ones to go through all of those classes and all of that teaching, so that 1, they can understand what's being taught, and 2, when they go and invite others to come to these membership classes or baptism classes or whatever it is we produce, they actually know what they're inviting people to. Do y'all think that's the best approach for a church to not have all this in place? Or is there something to do that?
I think it's a good idea. And by the way, Archie doesn't come up on the screen. you're the owner. I've always wondered
Yeah, I
who the
know.
owner. I always thought God was the owner, but you're the owner.
I'm trying to figure out how to change that.
Yeah. And I do think it would be a good approach to take your people through it first. But I would just make one caution. I spit out a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make it too complicated and extensive. I would keep it as basic and simple as I can to get the ball rolling. I coach disciple making alignment, so helping churches get theologically, missionally, organizationally, philosophically, and relationally aligned. It takes it's about a year at once a month coaching stuff. And what I'm finding is that some of these churches, they produce these big, thick manuals, and then it just goes on a shelf, and they're making it too difficult. So I would agree with your approach. I would just say you don't have to have a 100-page volume to do it. You put together some of the basics that people need to know and start them out on the milk. But knowing that, hey, here's what the mission of this church is. This is our goal.
Bill Cox from up there at New Hope, down there at New Hope.
Yeah, Jeff, do you have a minister of discipleship on staff?
Yes. We have a guy that runs our adult ministries program, and then there would be a discipleship guy that answers to him, but he's more like he writes curriculum. We do sermon-based curriculum. So every Sunday there's additional study and work that goes with the sermon, and it's posted online, or they pick up a hard copy of it when they come in the church building, and then that's used in our small groups to go a little bit deeper in whatever we're talking about that Sunday.
Okay. We've discussed what we might need next as far as staff, and we have myself, a youth minister and a children's minister, but we're wondering if we need a full-time discipleship minister.
Well, I think, that'd be great if there's not a bunch of other needs. But I do think that what really has to happen for disciple making to become the core of the church is that every department, every staff member is aligned toward that same thing. So you got a children's minister who says, okay, what's the children's version of helping people become lifelong disciples of Jesus? What milestones do they need to hit? What's the youth version of helping these guys become lifelong disciples of Jesus? And so while it's great to be able to have somebody specialized in that area, that has to be the number one specialty of every staff member.
Okay.
Including and especially the lead minister, the preaching minister, because if he's not modeling it and trumpeting it and championing it, it's probably not going to happen. So it just needs to become the heartbeat of the church.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Good point. We're going to wrap things up in about 2 minutes. Brian has been gracious enough. I'm doing a leadership conference with Brian's elders, and we conclude tonight. But I asked Brian just to share a victory or two of something's happening here at Kent in regards to this overall mission that we've been on.
So we're going to jump on board and kind of adapt this concept to our unique circumstance. So in the year 2030, Kent Christian Church turns 200 years old. And so where our attendance is right now is around 120, 125. So we want to be 200 by 200. So that's we're kind of adopting that concept and bringing it forward, and having Jim here and just really being intentional and proactive with every opportunity that we can have, and looking at these externally focused ministries. We're very blessed that we have a strong core of internal things. We're strong theologically and within our leadership and all that kind of stuff, but we got to create more avenues to the baptistry and really making these disciples. So everything that Jeff has brought here today just dovetails beautifully with the heart of Mission 120 and what Jim's doing. And And so I'm going to turn this commercial back to Jim. As if you guys haven't already had an opportunity to bring Jim in to help you become focused on this concept and to really dream big, I want to encourage you to do so. Have Jim come in, work with your leadership, and just really get you guys focused like a laser on these things, because he's had a lot of great success and a lot of wisdom how to implement a lot of these great initiatives. And we just want to see the kingdom grow. So we're just at one of those times right now where we're primed and ready to go, and we just need that focus and that little kick in the shorts in order to get pointed in the right direction. So we're just that's kind of where we're at right now.
And I'm excited to be here, and God is just doing incredible things at this church. And my guest here also, Brother CJ Epperson, came up from Cynthiana, and you guys have done some crazy good things over the last couple of months.
Yep.
How many baptisms have you guys had in the last few weeks?
Well, in the last few months, probably 20. So I would say from August of last year till this point, 20.
And you guys are getting ready to go to 2 services?
Yeah, we're growing. We're growing at a rapid pace. We're out of room, standing room only. The fire marshal said do something. Can't do this thing though. No, really, but going to 2 services, starting on Easter, and then continuing that forward.
Excellent.
Yep.
Can I just say one last thing here?
Please do.
So I just saw Wade Allen enter the room, so he didn't need to come here earlier because he already knows it all anyway. But I heard Wade say something one time that I've stole from him, and I used it multiple times since. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And we've all heard that, and there's truth in it. But what I heard Wade say about that was to pose this question: what if the thing that you're doing over and over again is just what God told you to do? That's not the definition of insanity. That's the definition of faithfulness.
Yeah.
And God told us to be faithful. He told us to make disciples. He didn't tell us we had to grow a big church. He didn't tell us that we had to have the latest and greatest. He told us to make disciples and to keep doing that, even when we don't get the results we had hoped for, is not the definition of insanity. It's the definition of faithfulness. And so I just want to encourage you to that. I know what it is to minister for a long time in times of plateau and even decline. And you just keep the nose to the grindstone, keep doing it. There's no greater calling in the world than to preach the gospel and make disciples. And the gospel we preach and the Jesus we teach determines the kind of disciple we get. So,
Amen.
Man, more power to you. This 120 thing is great. I'm all in for this.
Jeff did an incredible job with that Zoom call, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hopefully there's a bunch of nuggets that guys can use to implement Mission 120 and really just help their churches thrive in general. By the way, one of the guys on that Zoom call was Larry Hiles.
Yep.
Larry's been a big supporter of the podcast, good friend of ours here in our community. And I think Larry's our game ball winner this week.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what,
And,
Dave, I think he was one of the first guys. I mean, he actually left the conference and created his own tile, Mission 120 tile. So, I mean, we give him credit. I think he was the first to officially launch the concept at his church, I think. So
So that game ball, we're going to get Larry a $25 gift certificate to the CRA bookstore. Buy anything you want on us.
yeah, amen.
So,
Couldn't find
Jim,
a better
why don't you
guy.
leave us with some inspiring words as we wrap up this episode.
All right. Let me just, I don't want anybody to think that church growth is not difficult, but let me just say we've made it more difficult than it should be. When you stop and think, as you read the scriptures, Jesus conversing with a woman at a well, Paul and Silas are getting up. They have their coffee. They're walking by the seashore. They see a group of ladies down there by the ocean and they're praying. And Paul says, hey, Silas, if they're praying, they probably have some concept of God. Let's go talk to those ladies. Before the day was over, Lydia was baptized. I think we just need to be more cognizant of the moment, cognizant of opportunities. God's opening doors every day for our people, our preachers, our leaders. Let's go through them.